The Ragged Heiress. Written by Dilly Court, read by Penelope Freeman. Chapter 1. The London Fever Hospital, Islington, 1874. The cold, passionless light of early morning filtered through the narrow windows of the female ward, and the overpowering smell of carbolic floated in a miasma above the freshly scrubbed floor. The eerie silence was broken by an occasional feverish moan and the rasp of laboured breathing from the regimented rows of iron bedsteads. Following in Sister's brisk footsteps, a young houseman struggled through a haze of sheer exhaustion to complete his ward round. He'd already been on duty for 72 hours, and had at least another 12 to survive before he could even think of sleep. "Is there any hope for this one, Dr. Harcourt?" Sister stopped by the next bed and tidied the tumbled sheets, smoothing them to pristine glassiness with a practised hand. Dr. Harcourt studied the patient's temperature chart and he frowned. "It's too early to say, Sister, but I'd say her chances are slim." Inclining her head slightly, the nurse was unsurprised. She'd seen many patients succumb to the dreaded typhoid fever. "We can but hope and pray for her, the poor soul." "Have any relatives come forward to claim her?" Dr. Harcourt brushed a stray lock of dark hair from his eyes, forcing his tired brain to concentrate. "Do we know her name?" "No, Doctor. There were few survivors from the sunken vessel, and she was only wearing her night-clothes when she was taken to Barts. They said that there was nothing about her person which would identify her." "All alone in the world," he murmured. "That is sad indeed." He lifted the girl's wrist, examining the palm as he took her pulse. "This is not the hand of a working woman. I'd say this girl has never done a hard day's work in her short life." Gently he laid the limp hand back on the coverlet, and he suppressed a sigh. It was difficult to remain detached and professional when faced with such a tragedy. He had 3 sisters of his own, the youngest of whom was probably the same age as this survivor of a collision on the river in which more than 50 souls were known to have perished. The schooner Caroline, laden with cargo from the East Indies and just an hour or 2 from port, had been struck by a steamship in thick fog and had sunk within minutes in the polluted water near the Beckton sewage outfall. Bodies were still being washed up on the foreshore, most of them totally unrecognisable. Dr. Harcourt noted the patient's temperature on the chart and hooked it over the rail at the foot of the bed. Slowly he dragged his scattered thoughts back to the present, but as he observed the outline of the girl's emaciated body beneath the covers, he could not help being affected by how pathetically small and vulnerable she looked. Despite her sickly pallor and sunken cheeks, the heart-shaped face retained traces of her youth and undoubted former beauty. He glanced at the nurse's rigidly controlled expression, noting with some surprise that her lips were moving as if in prayer. They had done everything known to medical science in order to save the girl's life. Now it was up to a higher power. Despite his strict Protestant upbringing, Giles Harcourt had seen too much suffering to be able to believe unconditionally in a merciful God. Even so, he too offered up a silent prayer for the girl. It seemed such a criminal waste for a young life to be snuffed out before it had barely begun. "The next few hours will be critical, Sister," he murmured in an answer to her unspoken question. "Should anyone come to see her, you may allow them in." "Yes, Doctor." The nurse made a move towards the next bed, hesitating and glancing over her shoulder with one winged eyebrow raised when the doctor did not immediately follow her. She too was tired and hungry. It had been a long night, and her feet ached miserably. She yearned for the relative peace and quiet of the tiny ward kitchen, where she could enjoy a refreshing cup of hot, sweet tea and a slice of buttered toast. But she was too well schooled in the rigid discipline of her profession to allow her impatience to show in front of the young houseman. She was, after all, just a nurse, and must always defer to the superior intellect of the male physicians, even the junior doctors, like this pale-faced young man, who looked as though he was going to collapse at any moment. She stood with her hands folded meekly in front of her, and her eyes cast down. But in her
Sample complete. Ready to continue?